How would you have done it, David?
I've never seen a property market move at that pace ever. I am terminating this call. It's very easy when you're writing in the Daily Whale or the Daily Fail. Oh, that's fine, to be sure.
What accent was that?
Yeah. He only publishes on LinkedIn when swaps go down. He's strangely absent in action when they go up. I'm not sure I'm necessarily fully on board with this direct correlation that this will free up.
You're buying a boat, Lee. Things are going well.
David's put me off many times, actually, when we've spoken about it in the past.
This is one of a number of fudge numbers that appear in the overall numbers. And these are rounding errors when you're talking tens of millions here or there. There is a fantastic quote that I found on the internet by the finance minister for King Louis XIV. That's in France, just for avoidance of doubt.
Welcome to the Mortgage Mingle podcast, the podcast made by mortgage professionals for mortgage professionals. Today, we're joined by David Whittaker, a leading figure in the UK mortgage market and the force behind Mortgages for Business, which rebranded to Mortgage Finance Brokers. And, of course, he's the founder of buy-to-let lender Keystone Property Finance. David's story begins with a decade of service in the Royal Engineers, a chapter that shaped his disciplined, strategic approach to lending. Over the years, he's built a reputation for crafting innovative solutions in the buy-to-let market, making him a key voice in specialist property finance, who doesn't mince his words. David Whittaker, welcome to the Mortgage Mingle podcast. It's so good to have you here today. We're absolutely delighted to have you. Thank you for joining us. Let's dive right in. So I've just done a little preamble, actually, and it mentions about your distinguished career in the Royal Engineers before you came into the world of mortgages, a world of precision and discipline. And what I want to know is how did that shape your philosophy to what you do now?
It's probably why I only lasted 10 years.
Well, 10 years is still pretty good.
Yes, good going.
I guess the key thing it taught me, and it's a bit sanguine, there are times when our industry is very, very stressful, and my goodness, the last 4 years it's felt like it. And Monty, you've written very eloquently about that and the pressures that people have faced and the need for us all to be nice to each other. But ultimately, there's nothing that we do that means that anyone has died. And occasionally when you're having a really bad day and you get a Liz Truss Chancellor's budget and you really do wonder why you're jolly well bothering, you just got to reflect and say, okay, this is really unpleasant. We regather, we restart again tomorrow morning, we reset, and off we go again. And I think there's many people in our industry who have wonderful careers and they've only ever lived in the mortgage industry. They've been in banks or insurance companies, or they've come up through the administration side, or they've been brokers, and it's been their whole life. They don't have a different inflection point to be able to say, do you know what? No one did die today. Why, heavens above, I hope not in our industry anyway.
And you really feel that your time there gave you that level of perspective on life?
Yeah, I think so. The irony is many people will say, oh, well, it's incredibly hierarchical and, you have to do exactly as you're jolly well told. But there's nothing better than being told as a young captain by a lance corporal at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're both cold, wet and fed up, exactly what he thinks about the suggestion you've just made to him of what he should be doing. And you can ultimately pull rank, but you very rarely do so. And working with soldiers, the officers kind of that you've been through training with them, they're your friends and they've perhaps went to school with you or university with you, kind of know them quite well. But there's nothing better than working with a soldier who tells you exactly what he or she thinks, because there's quite a lot of girls in the army these days, for keeping you very, very, very well grounded. And my goodness, if you drop them in it, you can rest assured they can drop you in it at a time when it really, really matters. So you learn to work with people. And I love my 10 years in the army. I had some fantastic opportunities, some fantastic jobs, some of them absolutely out of this world and crazy. And kind of, we're talking about the late 70s to the late 80s. There was a big threat. It was called the Warsaw Pact. But actually, other than when Ronald Reagan made a rather unfortunate speech and we deployed for real, as the Russians did, it wasn't that too sweaty. There was a lot more fun going on. I think the last 20 years have been significantly different. And there's been lots of people who've lost friends and lost loved ones. And, Bretty, Lee, who works for Robert Brightstar, Now that's a proper job. That's a proper career. 22 years, private soldier, through to a warrant officer, regimental sergeant major. But just one of the nicest guys on the planet.
Yeah,
You'd think that he would growl and snap, and it's exactly the opposite of what he does. He's everything that is the antithesis of what people think discipline and hierarchy is about.
I've always thought
absolutely.
that actually your background in the army gives you such a good, as well as what you've just talked about, it gives you that sense of order and discipline. And do you think actually, I know that, you know, Rishi Sunak talked about it, this whole community service or going into that type of thing. Do you think actually it's something that is missing? And actually, I've actually always thought that a bit of service in that degree would actually help a lot of the young people.
Yeah, I think we got rid of national service in this country in the 60s.
Yeah.
But I think what Rishi was suggesting was something of a
something
hybrid.
different, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And I get the messaging he was creating there, but I think there are other ways of getting mostly there. You know, sports clubs, that now that schools have neither the time in their curriculum or in many instances the facilities to do it, you'd want to see your kids more actively involved in sports clubs outside of school, whether it's hockey, basketball, rugby or what have you. That can give them those life experiences. And at the risk of people that mock scouting and Girl Guides and the Duke of Edinburgh's award schemes, those are fantastic things, you know, off for 5 days trekking up the side of Snowdonia in March time and getting cold and wet and fed up. Well, that was about the summation of my entire army career, being cold, wet and fed up.
But
You're really selling it, David.
Of even more value to young people in the current day and age, you know, at a time when the likes of, you know, scouting, Girl Guides, etc., might look, you know, very uncool. But Monty, to your point, I think it would help a huge amount of people and really enhance their lives.
It also creates teamwork, isn't it? Because most of our teenagers either sit behind a computer or sit behind their phones, and actually they don't have any. Well, they do have interpersonal skills, but they're very different to the ones that we maybe have been used to or perhaps need within the financial services industry and customer care industry. So I do think things like teamwork, bonding is really helpful, and they can get it from some of those external things like Girl Guides, etc.
So we affectionately call you, those of us that know you, of course, we affectionately call you Major. But you were a captain. Were you a captain?
Well, this is one of the quirks of the army system. I left the army when I was aged 28, and I was doing what's called an SO2 job, which is a major's job. So I was called major, but because I hadn't sat the staff college exams, you revert to what's called your substantive rank. So you're right in both respects. So I formally retired as a captain, and I was very happy. And in my generation, the first thing you do is you forget about the rank you had. You just say, thanks for the fun. But just to go back on that thing about getting people to do things, we do a corporate activity one day a year where we take everyone to a local farm, actually, where they have all these, what I call Ian Wright type facilities. And it's quite interesting. Quite a lot of my younger colleagues are quite reluctant to do things outside of their comfort zone. And literally, my older brother, who's still the group CFO, he and another guy were in a canoe going across a lake, and they literally deliberately turned it over and just came up swimming and laughing just to try and get some people outside of their comfort zone. And at the end of the day, when we had the barbecue, lots of the younger colleagues who'd never done anything like that said, do you know what, I really enjoyed myself.
Yeah.
And it is getting people to do things they wouldn't perhaps normally do, because if they haven't done it at school, there's that. Well, we all have glass ceilings, don't we? During lockdown, we hadn't been driving anywhere for a long time. At least I trust we hadn't, ladies and gentlemen. And you get in your car to go and do a long distance. You're starting going, ooh, I'm outside my comfort zone here. So things can close in on us, even when we have those life experiences that say we could be doing more things.
But great that you afford them the time and actually the cost of that as well, because it won't be insignificant. So, it's brilliant that you do that as a team. And I suspect that as the years progress, they'll actually start looking forward to it. It'll be a date in the calendar that they're actually thinking, I'm really looking forward to that date. So I think that's absolutely brilliant.
It's good fun. As you said earlier, you're getting people out from behind their desks. You discover more about your colleagues. When you're waiting to do the next event, you're talking with colleagues that you don't normally get to spend much time with. And all right, they see me coming, they normally run a mile, but at least they will interact with their other colleagues, and they'll make more friendships across the firm from people that they don't probably meet day to day, even in a firm of our size.
I think those things become more important now as well, especially with COVID and stuff. Is everyone back? Presumably everyone's not back in the office, are they, David? You have remote people.
Well, when I put the shotgun away, Lee, they mostly are. we run a hybrid. We like people to be in 4 days a week because, we are based outside of London, so most people travel in from reasonably locally. My lending director, Mike Freeman, probably travels the furthest from Reigate each day, and don't ask him about the M25. But, when you're a fairly young business, and we're talking about the business, not the old bugger on the TV screen here, the only way to transfer skills, and we all did fantastically well with Team and Zooms, there is no substitute from sitting next to people and saying, this is on my screen, let's talk 100%. About it. So we like to have people in. We've got a couple of our underwriters that work remotely most of the time, but they come in once a month and have a lunch with their colleagues, and they talk about things that happen in the underwriting world. They never tell me, otherwise I'd drive a coach and horses through our own criteria. And so we try and encourage people to be in. And we're lucky, we've got parking. We're on a big business park, so everyone can park. Very few people travel by train in, but those that do, colleagues pick them up. So I'd far rather people were in the office, because it's the only way to really grow a business and get that value set that, Paragon spent all those years building into their operation. You've got to have a value set in there, and that's not done down a Zoom call.
100%.
No matter what people try and tell us.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly.
Let's move on to the world of mortgages, and especially buy-to-let. All these buy-to-let experts, and I'm not including myself in this, on the call today. But yes, so the budget last week. When I first heard about the, obviously I was watching it, and the stamp duty increase, I thought, I don't want to say another nail in the coffin. But then I actually sort of worked out that, you start to work back on the numbers and go, no, I don't think it's the end of the world. I think people are more concerned about CGT. And speaking to brokers over the last few days, they're getting this similar sort of feedback. So what are your thoughts, David?
Well, I've seen one article today that sort of said exactly that. I think many a landlord who still owns property personally is breathing a sigh of relief that it wasn't as bad as it was trailed to be. And that was probably a little bit of a theme in the budget, that certain things were leaked on the basis, this is what it's going to be, so anything inside of that was better. And, all governments do that, so I'm not taking a poke here. Landlords have had to be pretty resilient the last 15 or 20 years. They are the easiest people to whip, whichever government you are. So I guess this was just another moderate whipping. I'm surprised a little bit that they are not as frustrated about it, because this is a tax at the front door. I always think that if you're a chancellor, you're better taking a tax at the back door when they can't escape your clutches. You do run a risk that people may not engage, but I don't think that landlords will do that. I think they will absorb it yet again. There may be some chipping on purchase prices. Ultimately, like any supply business, the person who's going to pay for some of this at the end is the tenant. Rents will go up even further because one way or another, over a timeline of the landlord's choosing, they will have that money back. It may not be 2 years, it may be 3 years, it may be 4 years. They'll get that money back at some point. So I think there's a slight risk to all of our pipelines that one or two will pull out because, frankly, they don't happen to have the odd 2% extra hanging around. But I think once landlords get through it and get over it, given other market factors, I think, that are in their favour, it'll just make them somewhat grumpy for a while. They've had plenty of reason to be grumpy the last 10 or 15 years. This will just be another grumpy inflection point.
I looked at the Scottish numbers because, of course, Scotland have got the surcharge at 6%, so it's even higher than the one that we're just facing into. So I thought, I wonder, that came in December 2022, so I thought I'll just see what the numbers looked like pre and post December 2022. And there was a drop-off, but there was a drop-off throughout the whole of the UK. So the actual surcharge didn't impact Scotland, maybe quite as big as the renters, the the rent rises and the fact that they can only go up to 6%, I think that probably had a bigger impact. And I think that potentially the Renters' Rights Bill, alongside the EPC changes, is going to be a bigger challenge for landlords than this stamp duty surcharge. I think, as David said, I think they'll just swallow it in the same way as they do everything. They may renegotiate some of the purchase prices down, or just find the extra 2%. So the surcharge is not welcome, but in the same token, it's not catastrophic by any stretch of the imagination.
Was it me who was just blindsided by that, though? Did you guys...
Entirely
wasn't mentioned,
blindsided.
Was it? It wasn't leaked, it wasn't rumoured, it just came out of nowhere.
I thought there was something, because I always thought that they would do something more on second properties. That's what I understood. There was no way I thought it would be the day after
midnight.
I mean, that was the key really to it, wasn't it? It was just that normally it would be like, oh, in April, this is what's going to happen. It's just
imagine the bridging lenders at the beginning of that statement going, I was like, oh.
I think I worked out it's an extra $7,000 if you're buying a $350,000 property. But it's another thing, isn't it, that the amateur landlords are going to shy away from. It's another reason for them not to do it or to sell or whatever. But the professional landlords, you're right, they'll suck it up. It'll be part of their costs, won't it?
Yeah. Those ones that were maybe already on the fence anyway have just gone, you know what, I've applied for this mortgage, I've got no skin in the game, I haven't exchanged contracts, I haven't paid for anything, so actually I'm happy to just walk away rather than renegotiate. But I think they will be few and far between. I don't think we'll see a lot of those.
Lee, did you have any of your clients get on the phone to you and say, "Oh, I'm not sure about this now"?
Well, we had a couple that broke, but nowhere near as many as I was expecting. You know, some of them, you're looking at some of the ones we had in the pipeline that had 7% arrangement fees on deals they were doing, and they've seen stamp duty go up to 8%, the surcharges and bits and pieces. And you look at it thinking, there's no way they're going to go ahead, but they stick to it and they've gone on. I think there is a lot of resilience from those people that are professionals and have done this before, and that they'll keep absorbing those costs. I mean, ultimately, an extra 2% isn't the end of the world, is it, for experienced people that have been there before and know what they're doing? But I think it's exactly what Louisa said. Your accidental landlords would probably just look at it and say, yeah, do you know what, enough's enough there. I think I'm going to call it a day. And they'll move aside. And all that does is free up stock for more first-time buyers. So I don't think that's the end of the world. The professional landlords, they're the ones that you really want to stay in the game to keep the PRS sector going and keep that 4.5 million that need properties still out there ultimately.
I'm not sure I'm necessarily fully on board with this direct correlation that this will free up 130,000 housing units for first-time buyers.
It really was. I agree with you,
there is some overlap, but most of the people that you guys have on your books, whether you're the broker firms on this call or the lenders, our landlords are buying 3 and 4 bedroom houses, which will be second-time mover properties. A few might buy the odd 1 or 2 bedroom flats. So I think that was a sort of a political correlation to get it across as a general message, which the Chancellor's entitled to make that linkage, but I don't think we would recognise that in the numbers that we see. But I was quite intrigued to try and work out what she was hoping to raise out of this, because we were talking about tens of billions here or there, and we could debate that, but I guess that would take up the rest of our lives, let alone 1 hour. But I looked at the figures, and Paul Thomas sent them to me from MRM, and this is an interesting number. So in the first year, because we're now already in this period, they expect to get about 115 million in extra. The following year, 90 million, so perhaps the market there saying could slow down a bit. But get this, ladies and gentlemen, the following year, they expect it to jump to 170 million, which for those of you not using your calculators is an 89% uplift. I've never seen a property market move at that pace ever. Now, I'd happily take that, because what it says is our volume is going to go through the roof. Sounds good to me, but what it says to me, and this is probably part of the reason why the debt markets aren't necessarily terribly impressed, this is one of a number of fudge numbers that appear in the overall numbers. And these are rounding errors when you're talking tens of millions here or there. It's always crazy. Why not come up with a number in year one? And I can't work out how they got to that number, and just add 5% to it or take 5% off it. But the second you start putting a number that moves from 1 year to the next by 89%, you go, yeah, right.
It's not
so
credible,
great.
is it?
Well, that's what caused some of the irritation in the bond markets. Now, unfortunately for the Chancellor, there was noises off in other markets that kind of compounded the slight problems she had raised in the market. So what happened between Wednesday 2 p.m. and Friday at 4 p.m. wasn't entirely down to the Chancellor of the Exchequer and how the debt markets saw it.
Yeah.
But it's very easy when you're writing in the Daily Whale or the Daily Fail that, you can blame it on the Chancellor because it's an easy target, isn't it?
Yeah.
Paul Thomas said to me, David, I need a quote. I said, well, I'm not going to give you a quote. There is a fantastic quote that I found on the internet by the finance minister for King Louis XIV, back in France, just for avoidance of doubt, who was tasked with raising the money for the Versailles Palace, which took 60 years to build. And I'm afraid the job killed him. He died halfway through. But he came up with this lovely statement that said, the art of taxation consists in so plucking the goose as to obtain the largest possible amount of feathers with the smallest amount of hissing. And that, I suspect, is probably Rachel Reeves' legacy.
I hope you used that, and I hope you sort of you re-signed it, David Dickens.
If only David could find that quote.
Yeah,
Only
that's
David.
a great quote, David.
But that's the slight thing for all chancellors, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's always going to be hissing from somewhere. It's the amount of hissing that's going to go on. And I don't think the buy-to-let piece, other than being a bit of political showmanship, actually, it doesn't move the dial. What does a government spend? This year they're going to spend, and this is a non-political statement, they're going to spend £1.25 trillion. The previous year it was £1.15 trillion. These are numbers where whatever happens in the budget are effectively almost rounding errors, but clearly, if you haven't got the extra 40 billion, you need the extra 40 billion. But much of what goes on in the background carries on regardless of the noise and theatrical performances that do or don't take place in the House of Commons and in the mainstream media afterwards. All right, interest rates are probably a bit of a hot topic today, and Lee will tell us down to the last groat where swaps are this afternoon. But generally, we should Swapodopolis. You have noticed, everyone, haven't you? Lee only publishes on LinkedIn when swaps go down. He's strangely absent in action when they go up.
I was all over the rises the other day, believe me.
But if we accept the principle that over time swap rates will come down over the next year by 20 to 35 basis points, forget the Comedy Act on Thursday when base rate should probably still come down 0.25%. Base rate isn't going to go where HSBC and Goldman Sachs said 2 weeks ago it was going to go. 2.75%. That's for the birds.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
If interest rates come down and rents remain elevated and indeed will go higher, all our landlord clients are interested is the arbitrage. That which they get against that which they pay. And it's the size of the arbitrage, whether it's high or low, that governs their decision making. They are business people first and foremost. You've rightly mentioned renters' rights bill, Louise. That is a problem, as is EPCs. But landlords get over it, and their arbitrage is the difference between that which they can charge for a unit of property and that which they pay for a mortgage with or without a 7% fee, of course, Lee. And I think they should feel reasonably optimistic next year that the market in balance will serve them well. And if the homeowner market is getting on with it and the homeowners can get 5-year fixed mortgages at below 4%, as they should be able to, house values, which after all our landlords trade in, should go up somewhat. So not only have they got a cash flow position, but they've got a capital growth position. And I think they should be reasonably active next year.
I'm incredibly upbeat, largely because 37% of all fixed rates are due for renewal next year. 37%. So if that's not an opportunity for remortgage, I don't know what is, especially if landlords are going to have to potentially draw down money against their properties to improve them if they've got EPC regulations, hitting us in 2030. So I just think it's a brilliant opportunity for a very good, strong remortgage market. And also remember, only 60% of all properties within the private rental sector are unencumbered. So you've got a lot of landlords that are asset rich, cash poor. So again, potentially those landlords may come to be, the new buy-to-let landlords of the future, not necessarily those that are sat with just the asset. So I genuinely think that 2025, irrespective of what's thrown at the market, is going to be a really good positive market.
Good for you. I'm
End the call
delighted
there,
to
if
hear
you
such
like.
positivity. And are they your views or Paragon's views?
So those are my views. Those are Louisa's views, but based on information that Paragon has. So I think, given that data, I'm not sure anybody could reach any different conclusion, unless I am just the eternal optimist.
Any other thoughts about the budget? Anything else you want to talk about, or that may have surprised us?
Well, I think businesses as a whole were blindsided by the way that the employers' national insurance was presented. So it was leaked out that it was going to be a 2% increase across the board. And then the Chancellor then stood up and said, well, in better news, it's only going to be 1.2%. And we've done this adjustment at the bottom of the stack to take the initiation point from £9,100 down to £5,000. The impact of that on so many business is highly significant. We work in the financial services market where the salaries of people tend to be much, much higher than the national average. ONS data says the average salary across the UK is £36,000. Broadly, our colleagues who may be listening to this podcast would recognise a higher figure for our industry. So the impact on businesses that are perhaps in lower paid sectors like low-level manufacturing, agriculture and retail, the cost of that is what I call a slab tax. It's £615 per person before you add the 1.2% on. And that is highly significant. So there's Paragon, a long and well-established bank, about 1,500 head count. Mr. Terrington would not have been terribly pleased, but you can see how it's absorbable within a bank that is highly efficient, well-run and profitable. I have exactly 10% of that headcount, or I'm heading to it with the two businesses, Keystone and the brokerage house. And for me, it's an irritant. And my finance team has said, look, this is what it's going to cost us. And, it's well into six figures. So for Paragon, it'll be 7 figures plus. And I said, yeah, but guys, we're paying corporation tax. So the impact actually is 3/4 of that number. Still not terribly welcome, but not as significant. Go down to the bottom of the stack to businesses that aren't making very much money anyway and have a lower paid workforce across the piece because that is their industry. I'm not being critical of those business owners. So they have a high headcount but modest salaries. The impact of that slab tax is really significant on them. And, it would be great if Paragon expands next year and adds on 30 people. That's 2% extra. If I add on 10 people or 15 people, I'm adding on 10% extra. What we need is the people, the industry, the businesses and the firms in any sector that employ 15 people to add 3 people each. That is where you get economic growth. And my concern is that people in all sorts of sectors will be fearful of adding 3 people. And if they step back and only add 1 or 2, that is where you fail to get economic growth on the ground floor of UK SMEs. And that's not about our industry. That's about all the sort of business clients, Monty, Lee, you deal with businesses in the commercial environment as well. You'll recognise some of your clients who are mama and pop businesses, and they're trying to break out from being 6, 7 or 8 staff, and they then go to 8, 10, 12, 14. If they're put off from doing that, that is the engine room of the British economy. It's fantastic that Paragon pay a truckload of corporation tax, that we pay corporation tax. That's not what's going to move the dial. It's those smaller firms who are now potentially fearful of going to the next stage.
So
100%.
This extra tax is going to fill in all those potholes and make sure that everyone's seen by the NHS in 48 hours and stuff. If we didn't do that and it didn't happen, how would you have done it, David? How would you have said, right, we need to raise this money without damaging business?
I don't necessarily disagree that there was a sum of money to be raised and the theatricals that went with, was there a 22 billion black hole or wasn't there? But, if the sum of money, and that was a choice that the government took, and I can say this because 2 of my children work in the public sector, so I'm not shouting from the wrong touchline on this. There were pay rises overdue in some of the the public-facing sectors within our society. But the definition of madness, and it was on TV Question Time on Thursday night. I don't normally watch them. It was priceless. I remember the audience said, putting more money into the NHS is the definition of insanity, that you keep on repeating the same mistake and you expect a different outcome. There has to be at some point an agreement with the management of the NHS, not with the nurses and not with the doctors, but with those managers who broadly aren't that good, that there has to be some form of improvement. And it's not about 40,000 extra appointments per day across the NHS. That's easy for a politician to say. It's about a root and branch review of the NHS. And it's not such a sacred cow that we can't get a grip of it, because otherwise that will drain down the lifeblood of our economy. And I think the Labour Party, with good intentions, generally thought they wouldn't have to change taxes. I can say it for working people. That's people who get a pay slip, for the avoidance of doubt. And I think that is what that, and the VAT that gets charged in retail shops and everything, that is 63% of that 1.25 trillion money. So once you say you can't go close to that, you end up hitting other bits and other business lines really damn hard. And I think that was a misstep. They could have said, once they identified their black hole, they could have actually gone back to VAT, or they could have gone back to other things, I think, and they could have spread it a little bit more evenly. Because after all, they'd made such a noise about the big hole, they had that, at that point, they had the authority, I think, to say, look, we need to revisit this. And I think probably, whilst it wouldn't have been welcome, we've all been on the receiving end of taxes up and down over our lifetimes. What else can we do? None of us on this call, unless Lee's going to tell me something about that boat he's always talked about buying, none of us are going to decamp overseas anytime soon.
You buying a boat, Lee? Things are going well.
David's put me off many times, actually, when we've spoken about it in the past. There's that small element of cost that I tend to overlook, which is called petrol.
And more.
You can get one with sales, mate. You get one with sales.
Quite expensive, it turns out.
But oars, if you get one with oars, that would be all right.
Self-propelling.
They cost a lot of money, those oars. Yeah. Oh, I said sorry. I misheard you.
Yeah. It depends on the quality, Paul.
These damn headphones.
I've told Lee far too many times today. Well, just to finish off, as I've told Lee so many times now, these motor yachts, they have diesel truck engines in the basement and not petrol engines. So that would have been a bit embarrassing the first time you came out of the marina.
I can see,
I
think there's a TV program here, isn't there? Sort of the Major and Lee go sailing, and just
instead of going fishing,
20 days on the high seas with Lee and the Major.
Lee Majors. Last 20 minutes.
Yes, Lee Majors. There you go.
No, you've got it. Lee and the Major.
Lee and the Major.
You've done it. Lee and the Major.
Lee and the Major. I mean, seriously, that is TV gold.
The bionic duo.
Do you think they'd both come back, or do you think one would have been overboard very quickly?
I think one would have eaten the other.
Started the journey.
Yeah, I'd give me 20 minutes.
When they left, they both had a full head of hair.
This wouldn't end well, would it, Lee?
Lee and the Major, that is just
at least you'll be able to eat
genius.
lots of fish, though, because Lee being such a keen fisher.
I guarantee we're going to get a AI-generated picture from Lee later of Lee and the Major of what the TV series would look like.
I do hope so.
Me too. And not like the other ones you keep sending.
No, not like those.
Wasn't Lee Major, wasn't he Action Man?
Lee, he was a Bionic Man.
Oh, Bionic Man, that's right.
Yeah, and the Fall Guy.
You're too young for that, Louisa.
And the Fall Guy.
Obviously. That's why I got confused.
Oh, yeah, the Fall Guy. Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant programme.
No, what I was going to say about boring budget stuff was it's unfortunate that Labour allowed themselves to get kippered, because I think a better way of doing it would actually be just to add penny on income tax. I don't think many people...
It would have been easier.
Really, if they know it's getting spent in the right way, people are a lot more okay with their taxes rising at a certain amount. if they know it. So we know we need money for this. I agree with you on the health service. There has to be a better way. It can't go on forever. We've got some serious issues coming with the national health. And I speak as a champagne socialist. But yeah, I think actually some money on income tax would have been a better way of doing it than saddling small businesses. Because I do worry, and anecdotally, I've heard of one of my friend's businesses the very next day laid off 20% of their staff. Now, you could say they probably had some issues anyway coming, but they just thought, we just can't cope with this extra rise as well. And another business sent round an email saying, look, we're going to have to stop all bonuses for the foreseeable future until we work out what this national insurance rise is going to be. And people just won't increase. They won't go from 6 to 8 people. They just won't. I know that already. And that is a real problem.
Yeah. And that data is really easy to get hold of, isn't it? So how many roles were advertised on day one versus how many roles were advertised on day two? And I think that data would be really easy to get to, because I suspect that's what's happened, Monty, in line with what you've just said, is people just go, do you know what, I was going to add to my workforce, but actually I'm just going to sit back and reflect and see what that looks like now, so I'm no longer going to do that. And I suspect there's probably a number of people that had job offers that might also have been pulled as a result of it, which is also, not great.
And in our industry, you'll see more of a move to self-employed rather than employed.
Self-employed.
Won't you? Yeah. And would you take on employed brokers if you're a small business rather than a big business at the moment? It's quite a tricky one.
It is, but I agree with you. Just a penny on income tax across the board, people would have gone, yeah, do you know what, I'm fine, or 2 pence, whatever. In Scandinavia, they all pay 45% tax, and they're all quite happy people. They all wander around quite happily, and they have a nice life. So, that's what it is.
And they could have identified that 1 penny and said what it was worth, and said, right, it is specifically going to be used for the following things. We know that Wes Streeting over at Health Service has plans, and he's bringing back one of Tony Blair's, Alan Milburn, back, and he takes no prisoners. And you could say, but the deal is we will get this sorted out. And it's not about making overly bold statements. They could have come with something everyone says, well, okay, that feels about right. It's a step on the right way. So I think having identified what they saw as a big problem, and we could debate what the sum of money was or wasn't, they could have then taken that to the next stage. But I think they missed the opportunity, you say, to wrap it up and present it as something that the public at large would have mildly grumbled about. And, all joking aside, a penny off a pint of beer to some people is a good way of taking a sop out of it. You remember when the Irish got into terrible problems in the credit crunch, and the Irish economy was in real trouble, and they took 3p off a pint of Guinness in their emergency budget, and all the paddies would go, oh, that's fine, to be sure.
What accent was that?
Yeah, bit Keds, I'm afraid of it.
Interesting times. But I always say the more chaos in the world, especially the world of finance, the better it is for you mortgage brokers, because people need that proper advice. And if everything was homogenized and the same, why would anyone need a broker? So long may the chaos continue, is what I say.
You're trying to kill me.
Yeah.
Come on.
Me and Lee have already lost our hair. We can't. There's not much. Unfortunately, it doesn't lose.
I haven't been a broker for years, and look,
I know it doesn't. It's a shame it loses hair and not weight, isn't it? Then I'd be nice and skinny.
Sadly, it doesn't work that way, does it?
Yeah. What are you trying to say? Thanks for that.
And I think in the sector that we sit in, both Paragon Bank and ourselves down at Keystone, buy-to-let is nothing without the broker community.
Yes,
I know
Absolutely.
Paragon are wedded to that model, and we're equally passionate about it. And I do worry when I get tech companies ringing me up and saying, oh, look, we've got this piece of gizmo here. Would you like to use it? And we do this, and when it's coming up for product retention, this is what we do. And I listened to a firm the other week, and I said, Yeah, and where's the broker in this journey? Oh, no. What you do is you go direct to the consumer and they press a single button. They go straight to your portal. I said, I am terminating this call and I'm shocked you think this is viable. And they said, well, you saw the logos on the opening page. Trust me, don't worry, Louisa, Paragon was not there and I would never have even expected you to have been there. But the brands that I saw on that page should hang their heads in shame.
Yeah, I could probably guess.
You know,
I thought
David for Prime Minister.
Is David not the mortgage
David for
mayor?
President.
I thought he was the mortgage mayor.
It's a slight
The mortgage
typo.
mayor.
Major. Mayor?
Mayor,
John Major. We'll go back to him, shall we?
Major Mayor.
Back to Lee Majors again.
What was that? What was Mr. Mayor? What programme was that back in the 70s? Mr.
No
Mayor.
idea.
What are you talking about?
Goodness me.
Larry the Lamb.
Paul, I wake up
Major-
most mornings, I can't remember my own name, let alone anything that happened.
Major Mayor Whittaker. Major Mayor's Whittaker applesauce. We haven't mentioned about the applesauce yet because
What's the apple sauce?
David, I'm incredibly privileged because David has invited me over to Whittaker Towers, and I have seen his orchard, and he has some splendid apples.
It's been
Sorry,
a
what are we talking about now?
We are saying
Is this a euphemism?
That's the only reason why you've been invited, because
the post-mortgage
we've got too many
career.
apples.
Yeah, the post-mortgage career. Mine's probably a bit nearer to David's at the minute, but no, the post-mortgage career is making Major Whittaker's apple sauce. So it's going to make us millions. We are going to sell it to the Yanks like there's no tomorrow. You're going to open it. When you open the lid, it'll go da 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 da. It's just, honestly, it's going to be incredible. So we've put the worlds to rights so far. So takeaways from this session are: we should have all been in the army first, because it would make us better people, more efficient.
I'd be rubbish.
I was a
in the
girl
army.
guide.
Friendlier, kinder to everyone else. Life would have been in perspective. We've also taken away that it was just a storm in the teacup, the budget for buy-to-let, and next year's going to be booming. So, because 37% of those buggers are going to need to refinance.
That's every mortgage, not just buy to let.
Oh, every mortgage. Okay.
Mortgage.
So Monty and Lee have no time to, do their other stuff: the drinking, the fishing, the snooker, the table tennis,
and the motor power boat.
The boat, yes.
Oh yeah, the sailing.
Boat, yeah.
So that'll be good. Yeah. So Major Whittaker, if you could turn back the clock on one day this year and do it differently, what day would it be and why?
This will give Lee great joy, I suspect. I should probably have taken my product set down on Tuesday evening and not left it out there till Wednesday evening. It all looked so good at 11:30 on Wednesday morning.
It really did.
5-year swap was down 9.5 basis points. At the end of the day, it ended up net on the day 8.5 up, so like 20 basis points on the day. And, I hate pulling products at short notice. I think we still gave people 3 hours notice. I hate doing that. And, if I could find a way that I could price products that I don't get rammed, and I know that Louisa's team will have much more sophisticated tools in their treasury department. You want to try and keep products out there and get stuff in, but there has to be occasions when you have to go for cover. And you know what? I offer a limited apology that we didn't bother to put anything up on Thursday and Friday as it continues to go up, but we've done it today. And I don't like where it's at. I don't think it's right for the market, but you kind of got to be seen to be there, and then you guys can advise your customers whether they should do something about it. So I found the last 4 or 5 days unsatisfactory because there's not a great deal I could do about it. And I'm not unique. All lenders have had to make their decisions. Yeah. I've watched my peers do it, and by and large, they've handled it well and professionally. But it's our idea of a bad week in the office.
Yeah. Okay.
What a nightmare for lenders the last week was, though. And I think most people understand that. It's just impossible to get your pricing right and, have any kind of realistic steer of giving timescales to pull rates and get it done with sufficient notice for brokers. It's been a nightmare. Obviously, tomorrow's going to have a bit of an impact. The base rate cut's going to have a bit of an impact as well. There's going to be other hurdles that are coming up this week. So I think maybe a little bit more understanding from brokers on lenders doing what they have to do is probably called for, in my eyes.
Well, that's always appreciated. Thanks,
yeah,
Lee.
thank you.
Well,
but also from a customer's perspective, nothing is that urgent, is it?
No.
If the rates look as they do this week, who's to say they're not going to stabilise next week?
Yeah.
They might get worse. We really don't know. But I think it's potentially a bit of a waiting game as it stands at the minute to see what happens. And like you say, everybody just cut each other a little bit of slack.
And solicitors as well, bless them, on the day of the budget, staying in the offices till midnight to get exchanges through. I think hats off to them as well. They deserve a special mention. What a nightmare they had.
Agree.
Yeah.
That is a nightmare, isn't it?
When somebody gives you so little notice, that was horrific.
That must have been horrendous.
Yeah. Anyone else we should be thanking?
I think Lee's just crawling to the whole market now.
Okay, well, David Whittaker, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been amazing. We have learned lots, as we always do in your company.
Thank you for inviting me to join in, guys. It's been great fun prodding our market.
Yeah.
I need the recipe from Mr. Brett.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm looking, especially for Christmas time. Applesauce at Christmas is lovely.
This episode is sponsored by Major Whittaker's Applesauce.
Can you add some cinnamon into the applesauce? I always find that gives it a
yeah.
He grows that on the estate as well.
I bet he doesn't.
You want to see what else he's got in the greenhouse? He's got
How big is
these
this
plants with
estate?
these little spiky leaves.
Do they have a funny aroma? Under the lights?
That's what we all occasionally find in our property portfolios, isn't it, Louisa? And the conversations with the local constabulary are comedy gold.
Yeah.